Today we're replacing the OG original gangsta HTC Vive with the Vive Pro 2. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back. As always, I'm Brian Lovett. This is All Your Tech. Today I'm unboxing the Vive Pro 2. I'm going to take it and set it up on my system and compare it to the original HTC Vive. There should be a couple generational leaps between the two headsets, and I'm expecting a pretty stark difference between the two. Now first we'll talk about the OG HTC Vive headset that this will be replacing. This had a 2160 by 1200 display resolution with AMOLED screens that were 3.6 inches each. It gave you a resolution of 1080 by 1200 per eye. Now this had a native refresh rate of 90 Hz and 110 degree field of view. Now let's take a look at the HTC Vive Pro 2. Now this one has a 5K display. It's effectively 4896 by 2448 or 2448 by 2448 per eye. You'll notice they actually moved to a square display, which is somewhat interesting. So while this has a 120 degree field of view, 10 degrees wider than the original HTC Vive, it does have a slightly narrower vertical field of view. Now this one does support both 90 Hz and 120 Hz, so you should get smoother, better gameplay, assuming you've got the video hardware to back this thing up and to push those frame rates. Now in this case, we are testing on my AMD rig behind me, which sports an RTX 3090 video card. Now a lot of people question why I bought an RTX 3090, being that it was one of the most expensive video cards made at the time, and really my reasoning was next generation VR. In order to drive a 5K headset, do things like super sampling, and really get the most out of your frame rates, you're going to need a pretty powerful video card. Now, of course, the 3080 Ti is out now, and I think it would do a fine job, but this is what I have, this is what I went with. Now, the retail price on this is $799. That does not include controllers or base stations. This uses the same Lighthouse base stations that the original HTC Vive and Vive Pro used. Now, the Vive Pro used the 2.0 base stations. Essentially, the difference between the 1.0 and the 2.0 is that with the 2.0s, you could connect up to 16 of them, making for a massive playing area and better tracking, whereas the 1.0s, you only connect 2 of them. So I'm using the original 1.0 tracking Lighthouses, which should work just fine. The other thing to note is it comes with pretty much the same controllers it's always had, which they kind of suck. So what I'm using is my Valve Index knuckle controllers. I think that's the way to go. Now here is what has frustrated me to no end for the past, I'd say, year or two, and the reason I didn't buy a new VR headset before now. Now of course the Valve Index came out and I was really tempted to purchase that. It had slightly better resolution, narrower field of view, but it had the Valve knuckles, and I think that the knuckle controllers they're evolutionary, especially when you're playing things like Half-Life Alyx, where you can make full use of those hand controls. Now, I wasn't completely sold on the Index, and then HP came out with the Reverb G2. Now, that thing has amazing resolutions, amazing specs, but it's Windows Mixed Reality, the controllers suck, and in order to set it up to use Knuckles, you still have to go through all the hassle of setting up your Lighthouse base station tracking and somehow mapping that and keeping it tracking perfectly with Windows Mixed Reality. It seems like there are a lot of trade-offs whichever direction you end up going. So in my mind, when the HTC Vive Pro 2 came out and it was announced, it had resolution that was on par or beats out the G2. It still uses the Lighthouse tracking, and you can use Knuckles with it natively. You've got Steam VR and everything that goes along with that, and so is this the ultimate VR headset for right now? That's what we're going to find out. Let's start by getting this thing out of the box. So inside the box are 2 smaller boxes. All right, so we've got power cable, screen cleaner. Not sure what those are. We've got an adapter that goes from DisplayPort. We've got another DisplayPort cable and a standard USB cable. Now that all plugs into the Vive Link box, of course. Inside the larger box, oh yeah, So here we have the Vive Pro 2. Let's pop these off. Now these have massive over-ear speakers. I do appreciate that the Vive Pros come with the better head strap. Now this is going to be very similar. If you've seen the original Vive Pro, this thing looks almost identical. In fact, it still has the same terrible microphone. It has the dual cameras up front and very similar strap, earpieces, and everything else. Now the cable, you have one long cable, which is nice, whereas the old OG Vive, and this actually caused problems for me. The old Vive had at least, what, 4 cables coming out of the top of it, and so if pressure was applied to any of these unevenly, you ended up having display issues like I do. My display actually flickers now. Let's start by taking a look at Half-Life Alyx. Now this is my first attempt at trying to get a through-the-lens view of VR in action on a headset, so bear with me. This is actually one of my favorite scenes in Half-Life Alyx. You can see that there's almost zero gravity, everything's floating around you, and it just looks stunning. And I think seeing this at 120 frames a second on an RTX 3090 with this higher resolution just makes it all the better. Now, one of the first things I'll point out is that there's absolutely no screen door effect at all. You cannot see in between the pixels when you're looking around. So for anyone with an original Vive, if you've ever used virtual desktop, you know that reading text is nearly impossible. You're not going to spend much more time than you absolutely need to in here, but with this, it's painless. I don't have any eye strain. The resolution is so high that you don't feel like your eyeballs are gonna start bleeding. It's actually rather nice. Now, one thing I did notice almost immediately is that while the horizontal field of view is bigger than the HTC Vive, it's actually narrower vertically. So because of these square lenses, you get slightly lower field of view up and down, and you notice that when you get into games and when you start looking up and down. So the first thing I did was I replaced the stock thick foam pad with this one from my HTC Vive. I'll throw a link to it in the description. It's a very thin faceplate. It snaps right on here. It's no big deal. It's all Velcro. This one's also perforated, and it's a little better for high action things when you're working out or you're getting a little sweaty. But putting this on, it was thin enough and it got the lenses close enough to my face that that vertical field of view looks just as good as it does on the original Vive. And now you've got even more horizontal field of view. So just a quick tip for anyone picking one of these up. Other notes, you can go all the way down to 57 millimeters on the IPD adjustment. So for people with a narrower interpupillary distance, you'll like this headset. I will say that the factory strap and head setup is not as comfortable as my original HTC Vive with an aftermarket head strap. Now, having said that, it's not that it's uncomfortable. It's actually a very comfortable headset, but it's not as comfortable as that setup. Man, I wish they would have gone with clear lenses. One of the first mods I did to my HTC Vive was I swapped out the stock factory lenses for the Gear VR lenses. Even though they were the non-Fresnel glass lenses, now these are back to the factory Fresnel lenses, and you do have God rays. You have those weird refractions and reflections of light as you move your head side to side. So I wish they'd do away with those, but you know, we're kind of stuck with it. So overall, I don't necessarily think HTC knocked it out of the park with the Vive Pro 2, and I know they're not necessarily targeting gamers. They're going more for the enterprise level of consumer, but if you do happen to have an original Vive or a first-gen headset, even an Oculus, this is going to be a pretty significant upgrade, especially if you've already got the tracking stations, Valve Knuckles, all that stuff. Now, if you're buying this from scratch, you're looking at spending $1,300, $1,400. I'd be hard-pressed to spend that much when you can get a G2 complete setup from HP for significantly less money. If you've already got something like a Valve Index, I'd probably wait till the next generation of headset. I think we're going to see more changes. This is essentially a Vive Pro with higher resolution. And, you know, that might not be compelling for some people. For me, it was a pretty big upgrade. So that was my quick synopsis, my quick walkthrough of the Vive Pro 2. Let me know down in the comments what you want to see next. I'm going to go through and do a much more extensive set of benchmarks and try some different games and experiences. So let me know what you want to see down below, and we'll get back at you. All right, thanks everybody. See ya.